Prepare for takeoff, please.
It's the Shipping Pod. Hello and welcome to the Shipping Pod. I am here with Best Picture winner.
La La Land?
No, Ryan Dooley.
Oh, man. I'm sorry, I read the wrong card.
It's okay, my friend. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audible.com/theshippingpod. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And this week, I'm going to recommend In Our Backyard, Human Trafficking in America and What We Can Do to Stop It by Nita Bellis, and it's narrated by Nicole Zanzarella.
Sounds exciting.
It really does. Well, as you may learn this episode, our topic this week is human trafficking. It was recently just Shine a Light on Slavery Day, held by the End It movement. That seemed to get quite a bit of traction, and it's a topic that affects our industry and throughout the supply chain. And Indeed. As we'll learn, it's a true intermodal form of moving people, human cargo.
You are correct, sir. There are many types of human trafficking, but international human trafficking, that one's right up our alley.
Well, yeah, and we'll get to that because it's kind of interesting. When you think of human trafficking, I think most people are probably initially thinking that you're abducting or taking someone by force from one country and bringing them to another and putting them in some sort of sexual slavery or servitude or whatever it may be. But a lot of human trafficking actually occurs on a local level, on a state level.
You know, it's like they say, think global, act local.
Yeah. Well, human trafficking, what is it? The exploitation of men, women, and children for the purpose of financial or other material benefit. The action or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or area to another, typically for the purpose of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Human trafficking is the second largest and fastest growing criminal industry in the world, with as many as 27 million individuals living as slaves.
Jeez. Throughout the world. That is some epic growth.
Yeah, and it increases every year. It doesn't seem that there's much to sort of stem the tide. But as we touched on, what are some types of human trafficking? The three most common types are sex trafficking, forced labor, and debt bondage.
Debt bondage. I am unfamiliar with that topic. I came across the first two in my research.
Sure. So debt bondage is basically when someone is living within their country and they usually a third world country and they owe somebody a large sum of money. They will go to them and they'll say, well, you have to get on this boat or get in the back of this truck and go work in another country to pay off your debt.
Jeez.
And that's debt bondage. And it's the kind of thing, too, that you can never actually pay it off because when they bring you to the other country, they take your passport, they let your visa expire, you're stuck there. Even if you have the freedom to pay your own rent, you're not just locked up. They'll take your money anyway. So there's not much to send home or anything to that effect.
That is insane that is still a thing today.
Well, sure. Of course, yeah, it definitely is. And I think, too, as I learned when I was researching human trafficking, most people, or at least I did, I'm not going to not say most people, but I think the way that it's sort of depicted in, I don't know, I'm a simple man, movies like Taken, it's usually sex
great
trafficking,
movie.
Right?
Great movie. Tough scenario to be in, but great movie.
Yeah, not a good one to be in. Definitely putting the fear of traveling abroad in collegiate age American women for sure.
You know what? Another human trafficking movie that might hit home with some people? Star Wars, Episode 1.
Oh,
it's when we found out that a young Anakin Skywalker would be working as an engineer for, I don't know, whatever the guy's name was he was working for, to pay off the debt that his mother owed.
Oh, correct.
Debt, what was it called? Debt bondage.
Yeah, he was definitely in debt bondage.
He was an indentured servant, sir. I think. I don't know if that's the same thing, but...
Debt bondage and forced labor are very similar. Forced labor is typically someone pays for passage or asks for passage to another country, and they get them there, but then put them in a job. They take the passport, they don't let them back. With debt bondage, the person typically owed money beforehand, but they can go hand in hand too, because forced labor can be to pay for your voyage to go there. They say, hey, it's $5,000 to get, from Cape Town to London or wherever it may be you're trying to escape to.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you get there, you're put into servitude to pay that off. And they say that if you don't, we will kill your family or we'll kill you.
I got to tell you, we are a sunshine and rainbows podcast today. Every step of the way here, it's going to be just better and better news.
Well, so forced labor is the biggest sector of human trafficking, according to the U.S. State Department. Sex trafficking disproportionately affects women and children.
Mm-hmm.
Women and girls make up 80% of all people trafficked transnationally. Aside from sexual servitude, types of labor include domestic slavery, agricultural, manufacturing, janitorial, construction, healthcare, hair and nail salons, prostitution, strip clubs. There's a pretty high risk that you've encountered, at least in passing, a number of people who have been human trafficked.
That's intriguing, man. Think about that. One of the industries you mentioned in there was healthcare.
Yeah.
I would like to know exactly what aspect of the healthcare community is experiencing a forced labor scenario. The rest of the ones there made perfect sense. I totally get that. You come in, they're kind of like low skill positions, so you're easy to bring someone in. If you're going to force them in that, you don't really have to prove a ton. There's not a lot of people that walk up to the janitor and declare, be like, show me your background information. But I feel like the healthcare field, I wonder what aspect of the healthcare field they're talking about.
Well, so I think that when that comes into play, that usually is when someone is from a more developed country and has an education in nursing, perhaps, and they're offered a job, usually for a lot of money in a third world country. Then once they get there, the passport's taken away, their rights are stripped away, and they're forced to work in nursing. And if they don't, their family's threatened, their life is threatened. They're told that they'll be put into that sexual slavery instead of just being a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the coercion comes in. The big real themes with human trafficking are fraud, coercion, and abuse.
Yes. Well, one of the funny things that I shouldn't say funny, but one of the interesting things that I stumbled across there was the Department of Homeland Security has a great website dedicated to disproving all of these myths. I honestly did not realize that under the classification of human trafficking, it's not just smuggling people in and out. I honestly thought human trafficking was just, I'm going to take you from here, take you someplace else, and put you to work. The whole work aspect made sense, but human trafficking, as they define it, is anyone being exploited or coerced into doing anything. So, I mean, you could possibly be human trafficking right here in your own town just by forcing someone to do something that they didn't want to do.
Yeah, that's obviously a loose definition, but when you start reading all this stuff about human trafficking and how wide of a scope it is, you can see why it's so all-encompassing. U.S. stats are a little bit different because the metric that we use for human trafficking here is that any girl under the age of 18 who's been put into prostitution or had a forced sex act upon them is considered an element of human trafficking.
Yeah.
Even though it wouldn't seem to fit under the broader definition necessarily, it still is counted by the State Department. There's some methodology to all of this, though. So when someone wants to be human trafficked, because not everybody is forced to do it, there are quite a few people who are paying, or their family is paying, for their freedom, for job opportunities, for increased financial opportunities, and for the chance of employment. And the goal there is to pay to go to another country, get a job over there, and, pay the family back or send money back.
Mm-hmm.
That is if you're super lucky, everything goes well, you have a good coyote to get you passage into another country this way, you might end up there. But
yeah,
it doesn't happen as often as it should because, for one, it's highly illegal to traffic humans. But people who tend to have the cash to be able to do this and more legitimate criminal organizations are probably going to get you a visa and send you by air. And that's a little bit more nefarious because you're really thinking you got this job.
Yeah.
So they usually have recruiters. So when they're recruiting women for sexual slavery, they will have a girl close to the girl's age that they're trying to bring in.
Mm-hmm.
The girl will be dressed nice. She'll tell them about all the money she was able to bring in. They'll tell the girl that it's a modeling job.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just a simple third world country thing. This happens all the time right here, even to college American girls who they get calls to go to Los Angeles to go and model. They get on the plane, they go there. While they're there, they're taken out on Rodeo Drive, they're bought dresses, they're bought goods. When they get to the hotel room, first they're turning around, spinning around, getting their pictures taken. Next thing you know, the dress is coming off, and next thing you know, they're on a stage casting couch video.
That's this is very real, and I don't mean to laugh about it, but I'm like, when you put it like that, it really does put it into perspective, being like, there but for the grace of God. Maybe a young Ryan Dooley. Oh,
you could have ended up in that for your old modeling days?
Quite possibly.
Wow. Yeah. Or you could have been on the other end. You could have been the sender, right?
I mean, yeah, a couple of bad choices in life, and who knows? Maybe you're a coyote ushering people in and out of the country. Who knows, man? Who knows?
Well, some of the folks that were trafficked before that end up a part of this usually end up becoming muscle or hired hands in that debt bondage, so they're there standing by the door, so you can't leave the room when you see things are going sour.
Yeah, not everyone has Liam Neeson to come in and just shoot the heck out of everybody. Little John Wick action.
The State Department mentions that all nationalities and ethnic groups are vulnerable to human trafficking.
Do you recall the story about Amanda Berry?
I don't.
I forget exactly which town it was, but it was the one that they did the video for, where the guy came out. It was an African American gentleman, Charles Ramsey, and he was sitting at home, and he heard cries from this young white girl, and he saw her, inside, and they kicked down the door, and she came running out. It turns out she'd been missing since like 2003, and this was only a couple of years ago. So I mean, she was gone for a significant amount of time, and the guy's name that had kidnapped her was Ariel Castro. And this goes back into, like I said, the loose definition of it, but it falls under the umbrella of human trafficking, is that he was holding her there against her will, from another place. I mean, it was pretty crazy. It was a pretty crazy news story there, and it's relatively local, here in the United States there. Right in like a normal neighborhood, not talking in the middle of, some basement in like the middle of the city or something. This was in like the suburbs.
Yeah. It was Ohio, right?
Yep.
Cleveland, I believe?
Yep. Kidnapped in Ohio.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Ariel, the Little Mermaid Castro.
There you go.
So how do we move these people? It's, as we said, it's truly intermodal. It can be via air, sea, or land. People are promised work abroad or simply safe passage. They can be moved through the ocean. They're usually moved on either fishing vessels, via 40-foot containers, by freighters. Usually when they're going by freighters or fishing vessels, they're taking out to international waters. They'll get close to whatever country of destination they're going to. Then they'll throw up to 30 immigrants onto a rubber raft and, wish them best of luck and have them go to shore. And here's the real kicker. It's bad when none of the tour guides and none of the coyotes will get on the raft with you. Yeah. They teach one of the migrants who's looking for passage how to drive the boat and how to sail it into shore. Obviously, many of these don't make it. The human traffickers don't care if they do or they don't, usually, unless it's for sex and they're expecting, someone's expecting some bodies to be showing up.
Yeah.
But people with safe passage, they're not expecting something of you, can actually sometimes be the most dangerous because they're just going to chuck you into a boat in the middle of the water.
That is just horrific, man. Just horrific.
I mean, the difficulties there that you're going to face at sea are starvation, exposure, disease, mental breakdown, and death, especially if you're inside a 40-foot container with 10, 20, 30 other adults. I don't know if I know you've been inside a 40-foot container. I don't know if our listeners have been inside of a 40-foot container, but one of those on a very rocky vessel going via sea for 15 to 30 days with 30 other people crapping in buckets sounds really, really horrible.
Oh, yeah. It's disgusting when you think about it. I mean, there's a fair number of them that don't survive the voyage.
It sure is. And when we talk about trafficking movies, if you read some of the stories of survivors or just tales of these things, reality is definitely starker than fiction. One of the stories I was looking at was trafficking via sea. In December 2001, 13 Kurds were sent via container in Belgium to the UK. Each of the group paid £5,000, but 9 of them died of suffocation. A series of errors contributed to this. The journey to the port of Dover was supposed to take 8 hours, but it actually took 5 days. The reason is the container was accidentally loaded onto a ship bound for the point of Waterford in Ireland instead of Dover. But it gets worse. Upon arrival at Waterford, the container went through an automated unloading system. And although the occupants cried for help, the machine couldn't hear them. It was, automation. Maybe those ILAW workers have a case here against that. But it gets even worse. It just becomes this huge comedy of errors because from there, the truck that was dispatched to pick them up and get them right back where they were supposed to go picked up the wrong container.
Yeah, that's just bad luck.
Yeah, and from there, I guess whomever was looking for that container or who sent it just abandoned it, said forget it. So it took 5 days from when it sailed for a trucker to notice this out-of-place container. They went over to it. They heard people banging inside. But unfortunately, when they opened the door, 9 of the crew members had died.
Yeah. And where was, do you know how long ago was that? Like, when was that?
Well, that was all the way in 2001. And it was interesting because in 2001, there was a rash of incidents of people in containers going to Seattle. They were going to Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if maybe the cartels or whomever controls the human trafficking, and this was out of Hong Kong. And I believe that Hong Kong doesn't even have human trafficking laws.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have no laws against it, and they say that they don't have to because all of their other laws cover every single aspect you could think of with human trafficking. But if you read stories of survivors who have gone to the Hong Kong government, they were given no refuge. There was almost zero prosecution to the people. There was no prosecution to the people who had trafficked them.
Yeah.
There's no prosecution for the workers who use them in their shops, in their homes as butlers? I don't know. Could you be a human trafficked butler? You'd probably be more of, I guess, a maid at that point.
Yeah. I would assume that butlers would be better trained, so you'd probably be looking at the lower level of the butlering scale in that case.
Yeah. I guess if you were there for a while and you were doing a great job, you might get that status.
Moving on up. Benson. I'm with you.
Benson,
Mr. Belvedere is the one I was looking for.
Well, another big incident, speaking of Hong Kong, was the Cape May incident. That was with 18 Chinese immigrants were packed into a shipping container from Hong Kong to Seattle aboard the Cape May. They were in an open-top 40 that was covered with a canvas on the open top, but they didn't have top shelving, so they had a number of other containers stacked above their shipping container. The only light that they had was from flashlights. They ate boxed dehydrated vegetables. Their human waste was collected in buckets. There was vomit all over the place. When they ported and were unloaded, customs heard banging and screams from within the container. When they opened it up, 15 hungry men ambled out. The inspectors went inside. Authorities discovered the body of the other 3 dead men, because there was 18 total. And when they looked up at the tarp, there were regular tears all over the place. So these people were panicked inside. They were freaking out. And probably these ones who were on death's door were doing whatever they could to get out of the container, only to rip the tarp away to realize that there's another 40 right over their head.
Yeah. It's horrific, man. Just absolutely horrific, dude.
I mean, especially when you just think of all the human waste and the smell in there.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you had a bathroom, being stuck for 15 days, with 18 other guys inside a 40-foot container would smell really bad.
I gotta tell you, I mean, aside from that, I mean, if you were to take away that particular aspect of it, which is horrific in its own right, in order to go from China to the U.S., one way or the other, you're going to end up going through, I mean, it starts in a tropical climate in China for the most part, and you're going to travel all the way across the equatorial region, and probably through the Panama Canal, most likely, if you're going to the East Coast. I mean, if you're going to the West Coast, save that. But one way or the other, you're going to spend time in a 40-foot by 8-foot box, metal box, and the temperature is going to be significantly higher than you really would be comfortable being inside that for any extended period of time. I mean, in all honesty, it's a sauna, essentially. Not a steam room, a sauna. But it's hot. And if anybody's ever worked on a ship and they know what it's like when you get inside the steel, I mean, it's all conduction temperature. So if it's hot outside, it just continues to heat up, and then the 98.6 degree bodies on the inside just make it that much worse. I mean, it makes it feel like it can't breathe. I've been inside containers down in the Panama Canal and such. I mean, it's just flat out ungodly hot, and I could not imagine lasting that for a couple of days, and then add in hunger, thirst, and human waste. I honestly cannot even wrap my head around the idea of that being, how bad must it be for these people to make that decision?
And just 15 days, too, on end in the dark with just flashlights that you have to use sparingly. You're just sitting around 17 other strangers. You're all hoping for this new life, and maybe that gives you some common ground to talk about. But that just has to be so awful and dehumanizing. When they open that thing, I can't imagine the horror that was on the inspectors' faces.
Yeah. So I was on when I was on ships and we would be pulling in and out of China, they don't have, like you said, I don't know the specifics of the Hong Kong laws, but I know there is a law that, I mean, it can be punishable, or it was at least back in the early 2000s, it could be punishable upwards of death depending on, if you were trying to leave the country of China without proper documentation. So prior to departure of any port, you have to go around and do a stowaway check. They have these zip ties that you put on every single door, hatch, and everything. And if any of those are broken, you have to search the entire ship looking for someone that may have, even if it was just the cook or someone that was supposed to be on the ship, opened that door when they weren't supposed to and the seal was broken. You had to search the entire ship. We had to do it a handful of times for random reasons. And the one thing that they would tell you is they're like, here's your flashlight, and if you encounter a stowaway, run. Like, that's not our problem, because if those people are willing to face death to get on this vessel, what do you think they'll do to you to keep their secret? And I gotta tell you, it's a weird, it's not so much the human trafficking, because that's a voluntary part of it, so it doesn't tie exactly into it, but it just goes to show you, it's like, man, how bad must things be for people when they are facing that as being the better alternative. That's just the crazy part.
You have to imagine, too, that when you're opening these containers, if these people had any strength, they've already gone through a mental break. I can't imagine the condition and the danger. I mean, you can't really be held accountable for what you do. I get crazy enough when it takes me 2 hours to get home from Boston to go 26 miles to the South Shore. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine doing 14 days in a black box.
I don't even like driving all that. I don't even like the straight shot drive from Massachusetts to Baltimore. 7 hours in a car.
Yeah,
drives me insane. So the idea of multiple days in a container, I have no idea I don't know how you come out the other end of that being even remotely okay.
Well, and it was only 5,000 pounds in 2001 money, so you could pay for that luxury of being aboard a vessel with 17 other men with no bathroom and one bucket between you all.
There you go. You know what you ever seen that show Naked and Afraid and stuff? They should really do one. Stow away in a container and see if let's see how tough those guys really are.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not laughing or making light of this either, because I mean, you have to have a little bit of gallows humor, because this is probably the hardest topic, and we'll probably have to come back to it, especially as incidents come up, but it's probably the hardest topic that we've had to tackle. We try to stick to the lighter and more business stuff, but this is an important issue that a lot of people are bringing awareness to, and I think that we can be a forum to that too, especially since a lot of trafficking does occur by sea. Mm-hmm. The thing with container trafficking, which is kind of what we deal most specifically with, is via shipping. There's no real stat on how many people are transported via container vessel, because you only know of the ones that are found. Mm-hmm. And of stories of victims who come forward after the fact and say that they were on there, but of the millions of TEUs that come through the United States, there's no telling how, and that's just our country, there's no telling how many people are aboard these vessels. And we have some of the strictest, port security that there is. So some of these third world countries, it's going to be much easier. The United States is a little bit unique too. With other countries, it's not as essential to even consider container shipping, because you can use those vessels, you can use those freighters. But when you're talking about these long hauls across the water, that's where you're seeing them show up on our shores. We do know some statistics on there. There are 27 million victims of human trafficking globally. 68% are in forced labor, 26% are children, 55% are women and girls. International labor organizations estimate that human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. The U.S. Department of Labor has ID'd 139 goods from 75 countries made by forced child labor. 1 out of 5 endangered runaways are likely to become human trafficking victims. And of those, 74% were in the care of social services or foster care, which in itself is so depressing too. It's kids who came in because they lost parents or were put up for adoption or had abusive parents. For whatever reason, they're in foster care. They've been passed around and they're preyed upon by sexual predators or forced labor predators to give them a false sense of hope and strip them of their dignity.
Yeah.
Did you have a story involving this? You were mentioning one before we came on the air.
There was so as I was going through this, there was a couple of them, and I'm steering through the one I was speaking to prior to us getting on the air. It wasn't an international one. It was another one that was more about, exploitation of a unwilling participant, a young female there who was coerced into going into the sex trafficking world, but it was domestic. It was it was actually the father of a friend of hers from high school, and it was a just horrific story. So I'm gonna press on from that. There's been a number of them, and actually in recent years there's been a handful. Like there's one as early as as recent as 2014 is one of the ones I was looking at, and it wasn't even here in the U.S. This was over in England, and it was a major London seaport that they found 35 people inside a shipping container. But once again, they were, the vessel had hit port, and the container had been discharged. The only problem is that the process of getting a container out of a seaport, as most people would know, is a little more lengthy than you would anticipate. I guess if you didn't know the industry, you'd think it comes off a boat, gets put on a truck, and it runs out of the port. Not always the case, especially not in some of the major seaports. You might go and get stacked into a pile, and then get picked up by another crane and get taken over here to a top pick and get picked up by another top pick. And anyways, moving around a bunch. Well, apparently, through all the bouncing around, these 35 stowaways in London, they had enough of it and started banging on the doors and everything, and they got in there, and essentially all of them had significant medical issues that had to be tended to, and several of them passed away. But this is all just a roundabout way of saying is that it's not just people coming here for the American dream. And I honestly didn't know that until I really had not thought about people that might stow away in Africa trying to go to London, as opposed to, everything I've thought of in the past was always, stowaways trying to get into America for one reason or another. So it was, it's pretty horrific there. They were aboard a P&O ship that was from the port city of Zeebrugge, and it was on a 9-hour trip. So it had been loaded, and it had gone to a transshipment port in Zeebrugge and then made its way over to London. So not only did they make one journey, but they actually technically made two, if you count the two transship legs there. So,
well, they do estimate that in the United States, the majority of people that are human trafficked here are done so actually via air on visas that are just left to expire. They never turn, they never go back. And in many cases, they're never heard from again. They're either put into forced prostitution, or they're out there, picking vegetables in a field, or God even knows, some factories. They integrate these people into society so well that they could work in a place like Chili's as a cook in the back, or as a busboy, and they wouldn't know because they're not going to tell the Chili's guy because their family is threatened. So they go, the coyote or whomever is their broker, I guess, their human trafficking broker, or their pimp who's taking all their money. Mm-hmm. Gets them the job, gets the documents, fills it out for them. They show up to work. That guy takes all of the money.
That's one of the ones that I came across, and more on the domestic side of things here. There was a story of 4 women in Chicago. They're from the Ukraine and Belarus. And to your point, this gentleman was able to coerce them into, coming to quote unquote work for him. But then once they were here, he confiscated their passport and their identity documents. So for all intents and purposes, they were now illegal immigrants. Like, if at any point they could be confiscated and sent back to their country of origin, and for one reason or another, they were very, very much against that. I don't want to speculate into what their problem might have been, but it came down to a decision that they could work for him and essentially pass all wages on to him, and then they get to, live like peasants under his rule. But they were working in like normal places in Chicago. And like inside the city, they were working restaurants and, multiple other just side jobs, things that don't require necessarily a lot of application,
Sure.
Social security numbers and stuff like that. But they actually, when it was discovered and they were for lack of a better term, rescued by Homeland Security. They actually were able to testify for the government to try and put an end to it. I shouldn't say try and put an end to it, to try and help the cause of trying to make awareness.
Well, I was reading, too, about in the sex trafficking case, especially the children ones, of which I didn't want to recount any stories because as a new father, they're pretty horrific to me. But one of the ones I was reading was about a boy who he saw a guy who looked like a Western tourist on a beach, and, he's well dressed. He went up to him and he coaxed him into going up to the hotel room. And then he started, he gave the boy a little bit of money, but he started raping him. The boy went to the authorities. The family was called down to the police precinct to pick him up. Mm-hmm. The parents sold the boy to the pimp, the just American sex tourist, I guess, for $900. And he took him around, and then I guess eventually that guy got sick of him after so many months, or he got emancipated by the authorities or escaped. He went back to the family, and they told him to get lost because they stopped getting money back from him. I guess the arrangement was that the pimp himself was sending a little bit of money back to the family. Mm-hmm. So now they had an extra mouth to feed. They lost a source of income. And no regard for their child's safety or sanity. I don't know. It's so sad and dehumanizing to read some of these stories.
This is, once again, like I said, the Sunshine and Rainbows podcast.
And, well, I think that means a good segue, too. So what can you do? You're hearing this and you're outraged about human trafficking. If you do suspect someone is a victim or a pimp or in violation or is holding people against their will, you can call or text 888-373-788. You can also purchase fair trade goods, especially chocolate and coffee. Those are all certified to not use child labor, so you can feel a little bit better about your purchase and hopefully to take some money away from those who are using child labor. You can join and fundraise for organizations working against slavery. For more resources on that, check out enditmovement.com or follow the hashtag enditmovement. And President Trump date. He says he will bring the full force and weight of the U.S. government to combat the epidemic of human trafficking. And he started a panel with Ivanka, of course, as well as other panel members looking into it. I'm not sure. It didn't say exactly. I don't know if it's just bluster for Trump. He says a lot of things. And again, it was one of those articles like, oh, he made a statement about human trafficking. I am not sure what exactly he's doing to stem it. But it's a good thing that it's being talked about, and it's a good thing that it's becoming a focal point.
That would be a good one. If he wanted to get all fired up about something, that would be a good, worthwhile effort for him. Stop human trafficking. I think that's probably one of the few things in the world that everyone can agree, even the people that are engaged in it, are well aware this is really bad.
Yeah, you would think that they would be, and it's kind of like a macro version of the abused child who becomes a child abuser himself. A lot of people who end up in, not a lot, but some of the people who end up in human trafficking, some of the women themselves end up becoming the madam. Some of the men themselves end up becoming the pimp or the hired hand.
Well, that's just disheartening.
It really is, but I guess these people have no family. They're being sold off into sexual slavery. They don't have Liam Neeson coming after them to save them.
You are correct, sir. Some of them, honestly, don't know anything else. So, I guess it makes sense that there is a certain nature versus nurture type thing where if that's all you've ever known, that's all you've ever known.
Well, again, that number was
888-373-788.
Great. You can call
or text help or info to Be Free 233-733.
Oh, I was not aware of that one. And again, if you're looking for a local organization, some way to get involved, where you can donate those kind of things, enditmovement.com is a nonprofit who has a lot of that information for you.
If you want to look something up and just start your search, if you were curious as well, it's called the Blue Campaign, put on by Homeland Security. So if you go to DHS.gov/Blue Campaign, you'll be able to get right to the website where a lot of this information is readily available. So get out there, people. Even if you care a little about the shipping industry, for the love of Pete, care about the human traffics.
Yeah. We do have a couple of minutes. I know Ryan has a dinner date to make, so we're gonna backload the news today. I'm just gonna do some quick hitters here, and you can throw out what you got too. But first one here, Hasbro.
Coming home, baby.
You a Play-Doh guy or a Lego guy?
Definitely a Lego guy, but But Play-Doh has its place, man. I love Hasbro, though. Hasbro is good people, man.
Legos are really expensive, though. High margin. I was in Toys R Us. They had a Star Wars one, and it was like $400.
I just found out last year that Lego's a French company. I always thought Lego was part of one of the other, like the Hasbro, Mattel, and stuff. I didn't realize Lego was its wholly owned thing.
This is our version of the quick news.
Yeah.
Okay, so Play-Doh in Massachusetts, they are going to start producing Play-Doh in Massachusetts for the first time since 2004. Hasbro, which has factories in China and Turkey, says the move to a new U.S. line is basic economics. The market is big enough to justify manufacturing in the U.S. Additionally, it'll lower shipping costs and offset higher production spending.
Mm-hmm.
The article I read tried to spin it as they were trying to avoid Trump sanctions, but this sounds like something that was already in motion. I know every article is always so want to do that, but I think that it's just it just makes sense for them at this point to start producing Play-Doh in mass. I'm down for it. I want to go to the factory.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. I think you're maybe right. It was probably already on the table for discussion, but I'm willing to wager that the thunder that Trump was drumming up probably kicked that thing right over the edge, though. Because I got to tell you, that's a pretty big, that's a significant shift in policy there to start doing manufacturing in the U.S.
Yeah, but I guess to Trump's credit, if there is anything pushing it that way, as we record on the news every week here, we are hearing more and more about companies considering bringing factories and work back to the United States, which is not a bad thing. So Trump, if you're going after human trafficking and you're going to create jobs here, of all things people are going to attack you for, I cannot attack you for those ones, especially human trafficking. That's bulletproof.
Yep.
And speaking of pouring money into factories in the United States, Chinese firms, it was just reported, and I don't know why it was just reported because this is from 2000 to 2016, were
$1.4 billion.
No, $8.6 billion of Chinese money during that 16-year period has been poured into the factory sector.
Oh, sorry, I was just talking about last year.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about during that timeline that they saw. JCPenney, they're joining a growing list of American retailers trying to survive by getting smaller. They're shutting 140 stores in 2 DCs. JCPenney chief executive Marvin Ellison says the closures are aimed at adjusting Penney's supply chain strategy to compete against the growing threat of online retailers. So it's interesting. The remaining stores will be used to ship or pick up online orders, minimizing costs, but I don't know. I'd imagine that might create some complexity. Does every JCPenney have very similar stock? I guess so.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I don't know. I guess this one goes back to stuff that we've talked about before, is that, where do you see the real value? Is the value in the overall company making money so that I can protect everyone's job? Or is the value in staying loyal and true to the brick and mortar model and the individual places that maybe hire 50 to 100 people per store? I mean, there's an argument to be made for both sides of it. So, I mean, it's a tricky balance there. I got to tell you, I do not envy the people that have to sit in that boardroom and make that decision, being like, we're going to retrench so that we can make more money, so we can make more reinvestment and try to continue on in a good path, or do we protect the workers' locations?
Well, yeah, JCPenney, they made a bold move a couple years ago, too. They changed their logo, and to coincide with that, they stopped doing sales or flash sales. I'm not a JCPenney guy, so I don't know exactly what they do, but I guess they were just selling stuff at the lowest price they felt that they could, and there was no markups or markdowns. Well, consumers hated it. Whoever JCPenney customers are, absolutely despise it. It's very hard to change brand identity, brand direction like that. I get like Kohl's, for example. I've only been in there once, but they have a very weird system with their receipts, and if you buy certain things, you get things off. And I imagine if they took that away too, they would lose that core Kohl's audience.
Yeah, Kohl's has that. I actually like it because it's always a surprise. I never know exactly how much money I'm going to get back. Like, they show you how much you saved, and then you get the coupon, which draws you back in for the next one.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, it's like retail crack. It's really hard for me to stop shopping at Kohl's.
The last thing I had that, I mean, at least I have time for, is the ILA. Some good news out of ILA President Harold. He has urged East Coast and Gulf workers to abide by their current USMX contract and to forego a strike. Those comments were made just this Monday at the TPM. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the heels of union workers announcing that potential strike last week.
Yeah.
Which caused some concern amongst shippers. Actually, so much so, some of them were actually starting to lobby to Trump to make sure they get ahead of this one. The union concerns were with overregulation and with job loss due to non-unionized labor and automation. Kenneth Riley, He works for the union over there in South Carolina. He said because they had that mini strike over there at the automated gate.
Mm-hmm.
He said they had no intention of really disrupting the flow of commerce. The purpose of the protest in Washington with enough people to be heard. If that means no one's left to work, well, that's fine, but that's not the purpose. Well, so it's a good thing. It seems like nothing's going to happen just yet. Toward the negative, that contract does expire September 30th, 2018.
Yeah. Well, the longshoremen, they are raring for a strike just to try and flex that muscle. So hopefully it will be a relatively smooth period where everyone can come to the table and make their negotiations and make their side of the agreements known.
Do you have any news worth mentioning, or should I just throw out some events real quick?
On top of your China thing, there was also South Korea also kicked in on the manufacturing tip there with LG bringing in electronics to build U.S. factories in Tennessee. That's somewhat old news, but it was reported again, so it's worth mentioning. Outside of that, the only other thing I've found is finally the first person. I've been wondering how long it was going to take for importers to start talking about the border adjustment tax that we've mentioned several times here. My initial take on the border adjustment tax, which for anyone who hasn't been up on it, you can feel free, it's very widely reported. It's essentially an increased tax on imports with a commensurate reduction on of approximately 20% on anything that's going to either be exported or domestically distributed. So it's essentially trying to find a way to tax people on imports without hurting American companies by giving them an offsetting discount down the road. The only problem therein being is that any import that increases the amount up front is very likely going to be passed on to the end consumer. So there are many, many people, congressmen, individuals, like, importers, just people in general, that are very much against this, only in the form of if this gets rammed through the entire process from top to bottom supply chain and it ends up hitting the end consumer's pocket, that's not necessarily a great thing, especially when that'll be almost an overnight change, most likely. It won't be rolled out over the course of 10 years. It'll have to be rolled out fast so that we can see the development, so that the administration can get credit for it. And if that rolls out fast, wages are not going to be able to adjust at the speed of that, so there'll actually be a reduction in buying power from the individual. And that was brought to light by a fish importer who, I will save everyone the details of who it was, but there's a fish importer that came out heavily against it. They import a ton of fish from the Faroe Islands, as well as multiple other products of fish that we don't have the domestic capacity to produce. And even if we were to try and create farms, or what do they call them, the fish farms that they have there, it would take massive regulatory changes to overhaul those. So it would be years out before we could even start doing that. So essentially, places like, specifically they reference Whole Foods, buys their salmon from him. There won't be salmon in Whole Foods because he won't be able to pass along the product at a reasonable markup in order for him to be able to make money and pay for his operating costs. And there's no way that, the end consumer is going to take a $4 a pound increase necessarily. I mean, it might happen for some people, but most people will turn away from that.
Yeah, they'll eat cod or something else.
And that's exactly. But he mentioned, they mentioned in this article that I had in the Wall Street Journal, this Mr. O'Scanlan here talked specifically about one of the ideas that they want to have is they want to make food and food products exempt from the border adjustment tax. Now, that doesn't have any legs in Congress yet, so that's not even actually being discussed. It's just something that's been floated around. So I'll be very interested, and I'll be watching it because, frankly, aside from it being a significant piece of our business, this seems like one of those ones that there will be a direct impact to the end user. I think that is the only that, and Hapag have a strong fourth quarter, despite having rough go of it overall. They had a operating profit rise in the fourth quarter, although the overall for 2016 was not their finest year. So good on you, Hapag. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, Expeditors had some trouble as well in their fourth quarter.
Indeed.
Well, got a couple events. 3-1, Boston Hardware Startup Meetup. That's a lot of ups in a row. That's hosted by Formlabs and Mark Forged. That's at Bolt, which is in downtown Crossing, 110 Chauncey Street, Boston, Mass, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Again, that's March 1st. That's an interesting one. Those guys created 3D printers over at Formlabs. Well, they didn't create them. They created their own 3D printer. And it's a startup meetup. You can see what people are building in Boston. It's a great burgeoning community. I don't believe there's any type of cover for that event either. I would implore you, if you're in the area, to check that one out. March 19th to the 21st, we have the Seafood Expo North America. It's the Boston Seafood Show. Are you going?
Yes, I am.
I may be there as well. I am not going to announce or confirm anything just yet, but I will keep you posted.
Mm-hmm. Do keep me posted, sir. I will be interested to see if you will be attending, and I'll be interested to see who's there that year, or this year, I should say.
April 11th, we got the Connect TNT. Mentioned it a billion times. That's in Newport, Rhode Island. Go to conect.org. I think actually today, by the time you hear this, it's probably going to be too late because this probably won't be up until early Wednesday morning. And I think today was the final day for the early bird deadline to register. Maybe if you can tell them you heard about it on the shipping pod, they'll give you that early bird rate, but I'm not making you any promises.
Indeed.
If you want to reach us, you can do it at theshippingpod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at theshippingpod, Instagram at theshippingpod. We're on iTunes. Review and like our podcast on there. It'd be great to have some more reviews. That really helps us with the rankings and helps build an audience. We've gone global, as we've mentioned multiple times. We're from Bahrain to all over. We got listeners in Russia. They're probably from Trump's cabinet, but you never know.
Bahrain. We're big in Bahrain.
Yeah. How else can they get us? Oh, our podcast homepage, theshippingpod.libsyn.com, LIBSYN.com. Stitcher, TuneIn, wherever you want to find us, however's easiest for us. Connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm Timothy Dooner. He is Ryan Dooley. You got anything else, my friend?
That's it. Stay out of human trafficking, people. Stay out of human
Do
trafficking.
not human traffic people. Enjoy your dinner, Ryan. And
Scrumptious.
if you guys liked an abridged version that we did today of the Shipping Pod, let us know, and we'll think about a shorter format if that's what you like to. We're always open for feedback. The show's in its nascent days.
Indeed. We are in our infancy, and we are just getting lean and mean, man.
All right, then. Well, for Ryan Dooley, I'm Tim Dooner saying so long from the Shipping Pod.